My name is Janine Tkach. I'm a product director here at Phenom. I work on the career site. I also have a background in accessibility. And before we get started, I'm actually quite curious what drew you to today's presentation. If anyone is willing to share, I would love to know, why do you care about accessibility? There's no wrong answer. I'm just curious. Yes, in the back? Fantastic. Okay, so lead recruiter for disabilities. Who else? Saw a couple other hands. Yes, it is the right thing to do. Thank you. Yes, here to pay attention to other places that nobody else is. Definitely very frequent with accessibility. Yes, agreed. From your candidate experience while being inclusive, right. Was there somebody over here too? Yes? Employee resource group. Very good. Okay, awesome. So I introduced myself. Typically, when we do introductions for accessibility, I should also tell you that my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a white female with light brown hair in my 30s. Today I am wearing a red velvet blazer with blue velvet shoes. And I am very happy to be here. I really appreciate everyone taking the time out to join me today for accessibility. I'm going to talk to you today about what Phenom does for accessibility. This is mostly focused on digital accessibility, since that is really what we specialize in. We specialize in a digital product that you are using or thinking of using. So we want to make sure that it is as accessible as possible for you and for your end candidates. So we'll go over what we do today and how you as a client, if you're using our career site, what you can also do to help ensure that things are accessible. All right, so the challenge with accessibility. If you're not familiar with digital accessibility, it is very easy for things to go wrong. It is not a once and done. You don't just make a website accessible once and then hope it stays that way. Like with anything else that is code-based, you have to ensure it is constantly accessible. You have to do your regression testing. You have to constantly check on things. You have to ensure that new features are accessible. So any little change, no matter how small, can render something else inaccessible. So it's important to stay on top of things. And like I mentioned to you today, I'm going to show you how we do that at Phenom and what you can do yourself within the career website CMS. So our approach, there are several different approaches to accessibility. Phenom takes the industry standard approach. And what that is it's a code-based approach. We ensure that everything's accessible in our code base. Industry standard today is what we follow, and the industry standard is WCAG 2.0 level AA. That is what we supply out of the box at a minimum. I will also be talking to you today about how we build out new functionality that is actually built at a standard of 2.1 level AA, and WCAG is also up to version 2.2, which we are also preparing for as well. So at a minimum, we will hit 2.0. If you're not familiar with accessibility standards, let me just pause to explain. WCAG is an acronym for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. There is an industry standard here. It was created by the World Wide Web Consortium, or the W3C. It is an independent party that basically started to see the internet come about way back when and said, it's not really accessible. What are we going to do about that? Let's write standards that will help people when they're building websites stay accessible, so that people who are blind, who are deaf, who have motor issues, maybe who have attention deficit disorders, focus issues, whatever it might be, help them ensure that they're using a website in the most comfortable way possible. So they created these standards, and every year they create a new version. The most common one, especially in the United States, is version 2.0, and that is because it is the one that is most often cited in legal disputes. It is not a hard and fast rule. In the United States, there are laws for accessibility. They can be rather vague at times. They don't cite a specific standard. And the other thing with the WCAG guidelines is they have different levels of success criteria. They have level A, level AA, and level AAA. Level AAA is the hardest compliance, the lowest level of compliance. The industry standard tends to be around level AA, no matter which version you're on. It is a medium conformance, is what they call it. So we always try to strive for more, but at a minimum, we will be at a level AA, and that is what most companies across the world really hit as well today. So for Phenom, again, I mentioned that we like to bake this into the code base. Basically what that means is as we're building our website, we want to make sure it's accessible from the get-go. We don't want to add it on later. It is a lot harder to do when you add it on later once you've already built the site. It's like you've already built a house and then you have to go into the walls and rewire all the electrical. It doesn't work very well. You can do it, but it's hard and it's costly and it can be a little ugly at times. But the reason we build it in at the code base is because we want to make sure that things are flexible, efficient, and private. That's why we like this approach. And we are not alone in this. Most companies, especially if you're looking for a vendor and you're asking about ADA or WCAG compliance, they will be building it in at the code base level as well. So for flexibility, the reason we like this is because people with disabilities, they know how to navigate themselves when they go out into the world. They have all kinds of assistive technology. That could be anything from a cane or a wheelchair, physical devices like that. When you're talking about websites, it could be things like screen readers. There are all different kinds out on the market. There are ones that are baked into the operating systems of the devices that you use today. There are also browser plugins. So they're all available out there. And people have their own preferred methods. So what we like to do is say, you use the preferred method, we will ensure that we will work with you. And those web content guidelines, they don't tell you specifically how to build something. They just tell you what the end result should be. So there are many different ways to actually build something to ensure that it's accessible. But we like this because when someone is using the assistive technology of their choice, they tend to be a little bit faster. Rather than coming to us and saying, we've got this for you, click this button here, we'll make it accessible. It might be brand new functionality to a person, and they didn't come here to learn a new piece of functionality. They came here to do business with us on our website. They came here to apply for a job. That's what they want to get done. We don't want to slow them down any more than they might already be if they're looking for a job. We also, like I mentioned before, they can control their own settings. Just like if you think about your phones today, very often we control things like our ringtones. Sometimes we have ringtones for different people. We have our Slack notifications, all of that. In accessibility, if you ever play with the accessibility settings on your phone, you can do so much more. People already have that. We don't want to interfere with that. So we say, you bring what you want, and we will do the rest to ensure that you can work with us. It's also a little bit more efficient. We think about this in terms of design. The title of this presentation was that it's accessible to some, it's usable by all. When you make something accessible to one person, it really is usable by everyone. The visual representation here behind me is the curb cut. This is called the curb cut effect. If you've heard about accessibility before, you have heard this before. Essentially, the curb cut is when you're walking across the street, there's usually a couple inches of a curb that you have to step up onto. If you're in a wheelchair, that's not going to work. So many places today, you see them all the time in the city, they have a curb cut where it dips down. It's a little bit of a ramp, essentially. It was built for somebody with a wheelchair. But as you can see in the picture behind me, there's a person with a skateboard who's coming onto the curb, and there are people with a stroller. Anything with wheels. Sometimes even if you don't have wheels, it's just easier to walk up a ramp than it is to climb up steps. If any of you have done the Rocky steps up to the art museum while you were visiting here, you might know, hey, this is really fun and nice, but I'd rather take the elevator next time. So having these options for one person in particular or one user in particular just ensures that anyone can use it. And sometimes we plan for one particular scenario. We can't even anticipate who else might use this? But we realize that we have just opened ourselves up to a whole lot more users. And that is a really fantastic thing. Anytime you're looking to do business or find new candidates, you don't want to minimize your pool. You want to maximize it. So the more people that can use your website, the better. So it is very efficient. The other reason we like this is not just in terms of usability, but it allows us to focus on making our site as unique as possible, making sure that the user design is as intuitive as possible. We're not solving things disability by disability. We don't say, hey, we have a solution for somebody who is blind, and we have another solution for somebody who is deaf. We have another solution for somebody who gets migraines, and they don't want to see too many visual stimuli on the website. We build all of that in. We follow these WCAG standards. We don't say, click a button if you have this disability. It's very specific. And if you're thinking about people with disabilities, if you've worked with people with disabilities, you can have any it's a plethora, right? You have so many different people with unique abilities, and it changes over the course of your lifetime. The disability group is one that anyone can join at any time. You can have a temporary disability like a broken leg. You can have a permanent disability. Many of us are going to age, right? As we age, our abilities change. So this is a user group that is worth investing in, not just in terms of digital accessibility, but everywhere else in life. It's a very, very broad group. And lastly, we like this because of its private approach. When we say that you can come to us and we will work with you, we don't ask you what your disability is. We should not have to know or care about what that is. We are not asking you to select a certain solution, because that solution, if it's meant for somebody who is blind, for example, then we know you're blind. It's not our business, it's yours. You're here to do business with this website. Let's hope you get that business done. When we hook into all this technology, what we're really doing is we're, for example, with screen readers, we ensure that you can tab through on a keyboard. We can work with a screen reader to ensure that it reads out loud. We don't need to know what you're actually working on. We don't track that information. That's not really our business, and we don't really need to know that in order to build it into our code base, which is really nice. And as many of you know, disability is private and sensitive information. So people often don't want to share that, especially right away. They want to know what their employer can provide in terms of protection. That's why when you see job descriptions, they have a notice about discrimination at the end. People can make the judgment for themselves whether or not they can do the job or use the tools. They just need to be given the right information, which all that means is, for us, we need to be transparent about what it is we can provide to you. So that is why we like the code-based approach. And here's how we actually do it on a day-to-day basis. So for new features and functionality, as I mentioned before, at a minimum, we are compliant with WCAG 2.0 level AA out of the box. For all of our new functionality, this has been going on for a while, but for all of our new functionality going forward, we actually conform to the newer version of WCAG 2.1 level AA. We're also going through to ensure that our past functionality gets updated. We are also in the process of evaluating and preparing to become adherent to WCAG version 2.2. And again, these WCAG versions, they come out with a new one about every year or so. And so the disability and accessibility community will go through those standards, they will review them, they will identify the changes, and they will figure out what they need to do in order to incorporate those changes into their websites. When we do our testing, we have specific combinations. If you're familiar at all with digital products, very often they do testing in specific browsers and operating systems, the most common ones. So if you think about it today, some of the most common browsers are things like Google, Firefox, Chrome, things like that. You also have operating systems like Android and Apple, right? You want to make sure everyone has an app these days. If you think about an app, is it available only on iPhones? That doesn't seem right. It should be available on other operating systems as well. And so like a lot of companies, what we do is we identify the most used operating systems for our users and customers, as well as the ones that are out there in the market. We combine those operating systems with the most common assistive technologies out there as well. So our specific combinations are JAWS and Chrome. JAWS is a specific screen reader. It is free out there in the market. A lot of people who are blind or who have low vision will use it. And we use it with Chrome specifically, but it is used with other browsers as well. We test it in here and we test it wherever we can. NVDA and Firefox, that's another combination. NVDA is actually a product that you have to purchase by Phenom Scientific, I believe, who owns TPGI, which is also an accessibility company. They're an accessibility consulting company. And we test it specifically with Firefox. And then we also test it in iOS and Android. iOS and Android have their own screen reading systems. As I mentioned before, a lot of operating systems have their own accessibility settings today. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. We just need to make sure that we're working with them. iOS, it's called VoiceOver. You can turn it on and it will actually read everything out on your phone. If you've never tried it before, it's kind of fun, but it's also a little bit trippy, and you can increase the speed. So someone who's blind, for example, will hold a phone by their ear, and there's certain tapping gestures that they can make to select certain things on a screen. And if you ever listen to it, the screen reader goes very, very fast. If you think about how you visually scan a website, somebody who's doing it auditory will scan it very quickly as well. Unless you're used to it, it goes by very quickly. You can't understand half of it. But both iOS and Android, Android's version is TalkBack, they have that solution as well. We also have a third-party plugin that we use called Axe. Axe is a form of automatic accessibility scanning. There are a lot of different products out there that do this for digital-based products. We choose Axe. It is owned by DQ, one of the other main accessibility companies out there. That just helps us with our automatic testing. And I will get into automatic and manual testing, how we do that internally as well. Here we go. All right, so for maintenance, so I talked about our brand new functionality, how we test all of that. Once it's out of the gate, like I said, you have to make sure that that accessibility is maintained, that the functionality is maintained. So we test things on a regular basis. We do that with automatic testing. Automatic testing, if you're not familiar with digital products, you basically write test scripts. You tell it what the workflow is going to be. Like if I'm paying a bill, for example, these are the steps I need to take. These are the buttons I need to select. These are the messages that I need to see. You pre-program that. You program it once, and then you can run it again and again and again, so that you don't have to manually walk through it every single time. It's time efficient. Now, with accessibility, what I will say is that there's a limitation to automatic testing. This is just the way it is in general. It will catch about 30% of all of your accessibility issues. But that 30%, if we can automate that, let's do that. For the rest, we will do manual testing. So we do automatic testing, and we do this on a cyclical basis. We're running, we have our own, what I'll call the QA hub, which I'll get into in a minute, but we use that to go through all of our sites, all of our career websites and templates. We will test those at least once a month to ensure that they are accessible with our standards. Anything that is not accessible is identified for us in the QA hub, and we will fix it right then and there. So that's the engineering review and remediation. When talking about accessibility, when you're fixing bugs, we typically call that remediation specifically, but it's basically bug fixes just for accessibility. So we also use testing tools. As I mentioned before, we use Axe. It's an API that we use with our system. Any digital product can purchase Axe, and like I said, other ones out there on the market today. But that is the automatic testing tool that we use. It is specifically designed for accessibility. So it knows what to look for. It knows what standards to adhere to. They update their standards to make sure that it is working according to WCAG 2.0, 2.1, et cetera. And we can integrate that into our development process. So we don't just use that for maintenance, we also use that for brand new functionality. We're constantly doing automated testing. We do many different types of testing, but I'm only going to talk about the ones that are the most relevant to accessibility today. Testing tools. I mentioned we have something called the QA Hub. This is the Quality and Accessibility Hub. This is internal only to Phenom. It's our proprietary testing tool. It tests everything, not just accessibility, but it is fantastic for accessibility because our development team did a lot of work to ensure that we can test specifically to our standards. Yes, we use WCAG 2.0 and 2.1 level AA, but we also want to make sure that we are hitting our own standards. What I mean by that is earlier I said that WCAG tells us what the end result should be. It doesn't tell us how we need to build something. We have identified the best way to build it for us that meets the needs of the market. So we want to ensure that when we're testing something, that we're also testing it according to our standards. Things need to work exactly as they're designed. So we have the ability to configure that specifically within the QA Hub, and that's why we built the QA Hub. I will note that the development team, we actually just presented this at CSUN. If you're not familiar, it is the accessibility industry leading conference that they have every year. They've had it for the past 38 years at CSUN, the California Southern University at Northridge, which is in Anaheim. It's a very big deal. I got to go this year, a couple weeks ago, and we presented the QA Hub. And it's very notable too, I just wanted to point out the engineering team's great work because when you go to CSUN, they have hundreds of presentations. You have to submit a paper for it to be accepted before you can actually present there. So there are people who are reviewing this, so your peers in the accessibility world are reviewing this. So this was a tool that they got to present, and I got to help them present it this year. So it's a really nice big deal for our development teams especially. So it's our internal proprietary testing tool. It's configurable. Like I said, we can configure it however we need. We have automated and manual testing. We cycle through all of our templates and sites on a regular basis as often as we can, at least once a month. And we integrate with our ticketing system. So any issues that are identified, a ticket is automatically opened up. That just saves a lot of manual time. And this way we can track exactly which tickets are open, and we can get those fixed as soon as possible within our regular process. All right, and the partnership. This is where I will tell you what you can do to ensure the accessibility of your website, because it is a partnership. Phenom provides code-level functionality, right? So that's the functionality on the websites. That's the buttons, the workflows, the navigation systems. We don't create the content. You do. You create it within the content management system. There is a way to ensure that your content is made accessible. And this is a harder piece because there are different standards, and Phenom doesn't own this, but we want to support you in this. We have something called the CMS Accessibility Checker. If you have not used it, it's very easy to use. It doesn't scan for everything in terms of like functionality. That's the part that we own again. But it will scan the content for you. And content, just to review what that means, it is a rather broad term, but that's all the verbiage, all the copy that you own on the site. It is also all the videos that you have on the site, right? And it is things like your colors, your branding. All of that needs to be accessible. And if you're not familiar with that, I'm more than happy to answer questions for you, but that is something that a lot of companies need to learn how to actually do. For branding, for example, we're talking about color contrast. When you have two different colors on top of one another, like you see in the presentation, we have black and purple on a white background. The WCAG standards say that at a minimum, you have to have a 2-to-1 ratio, meaning one color needs to be 2 times darker than the other. And there are different conformance levels for that. And sometimes with branding, we come up with these great color combinations, but they're not always accessible because they don't have the appropriate contrast. So little things like that a company can stay on top of go a long way towards accessibility. It is an automatic content scan, and I will show you a couple of screenshots of what that looks like in the CMS. Also, our clients are welcome to work with third parties. I mentioned two of what we call the big three in the accessibility world in terms of consultants. We've got TPGI, DQ, that's DEQUE, and Level Access, although there are many others. There are independent consultants and there are other companies, and they provide consultative services. They will do automatic testing for you, they will do audits for you, all kinds of different things. They will show you the results and say, here's what you can fix, here's what your vendor might need to take a look at and fix, and we will work with you on any of that if our clients choose to run any of those audits or reviews themselves. All right, so this is the Accessibility Checker. This is comprised of that ACTS API as well as some custom scripts that we have written. When you go into the CMS, you need to make sure that you are in the Experience Editor and you select a page. Once you have done that, you go down to the left-hand side, you see the little person, that's our accessibility icon. You go there and you will select the scan page. It will take a moment oh, I'm sorry. I don't know if we can go back. We'll move on, but you can actually scan that and I will walk you through those steps. We have the QA Hub, which is our internal platform. I already covered that. We're gonna go into that in the demo, so let me move on here. This is the part that's more interesting. So we have the CMS Accessibility Checker here. Again, Experience Editor, select your page. You select the Scan Now button, and it'll scan it. It takes a moment. This is just what it looks like while it's actually scanning. It'll take a few moments. When it's done, it'll bring up all the issues. Now, these are all going to be content related. It will list them all out, and don't be alarmed if it looks like it's a whole litany of things. Basically, it's everything on that web page. So if you have a color contrast issue with one particular header, it's going to identify the same for all of your headers if they're all using the same color contrast. So they bring up all those issues individually because you need to fix them one at a time. So it might seem like a lot, but it tends to be the same issue over and over again. As you can see here, it lists out all the issues, and then in the main web page, it actually has a corresponding numeral. What you can do is you can actually click on, and you can see here on the left-hand side, you can expand what the issue is. It'll explain what the actual issue is and how to actually fix it. So we're trying to guide you in what you need to do in order to fix something. And you can see the corresponding numbers here. So these are all color contrast issues here. So I think we've got like 19 and 20. They're just pointing out that these different texts, which are different elements on the page, and when you go in to actually edit it, that they each have the same issue here. The QA Hub. Now, we'll show you a couple of screens of what this is like. At some point in the future, our development team does want to make this available to our clients. So you can do a little bit more, like a more sophisticated scan of the website. For now, we're the ones using it, but we do configure this. So we have to configure it for accessibility in several different ways. Here, we just show what the different configuration might look like for a particular product, in this example for a chatbot. When you go in, we can actually configure it. You can see the different pieces at the top. We've got components that we have to configure. Those are like the different widgets and elements on a page. We have the actual page themselves. We have the UI elements. Those are things like buttons. We have the WCAG configuration. That's the standard that we set it to, and we can change that, and we can add to it as we'd like. And we have our quick checks here. So these are just different screens that show you what they look like. The UI elements, like I said, these are different buttons and icons and pagination. We have to lay this out specifically and configure it for our different products. We have testing for both automatic and manual, and a combination of the two. This is just our way of separating out. Here's the automatic scan that, again, on average, probably scans about 30% or catches about 30% of your accessibility issues. In addition to that, we'll also do a manual scan. The manual scan is literally when a tester is walking through something. And I'll show you what makes the QA Hub so special, and the reason why it was presented at CSUN is that we're actually walking the user through each step and what they need to look for. And we tell them in plain language what they actually need to be looking for to ensure it's accessible and what they need to fix. When you read WCAG guidelines, they're kind of vague, and they don't mean a lot. So for somebody who is not used to testing accessibility, whether you're just a QA person with no background in accessibility or you're a product person like myself, you can still use this. You'll still be able to understand why something is not working or is not accessible, which is really cool. And that's what makes the QA Hub so special, and that's why we presented it at CSUN. So the goal here with the QA Hub is to one day make this available to our clients so that even if they don't have a background in accessibility, they can at least understand what is going on with the different elements on the page. And like I said, we call them different certifications. A full certification is when we're testing something, whether it's new or regression testing, we need to do both manual and automated testing. The manual check with accessibility is really to help quantify or qualify, I should say, the quality of the accessibility. With accessibility, it's not just a matter of if it exists, it's also how well does it exist. So for example, alt text, when we were looking at the CMS Accessibility Checker, it'll scan your images for alt text. It'll scan for whether or not there is alt text. It will not tell you if that alt text is any good. Alt text is alternative text. It tells you what is in the picture. So you need to determine, you need that human component. We're talking about AI here at IM Phenom. AI can't necessarily give you the quality of something. It can just tell you if something is there. So it can tell you, this is a picture that you need to pay attention to. If you just say this is a picture, you have no idea what it's a picture of. That's bad quality alt text. You need to actually describe the picture in so many words. And again, these are just more screens if you're interested in our QA Hub, how we can actually set up and configure different scans. This is what it looks like when you actually get your results back. Some of these are not started, as you can see. Some of these tests are not started. Some of them are not compliant. So this is just an example in a demo environment of what this might look like. You can choose a scan for each of our various products. We've got a chatbot, a career site, a video product, et cetera, whatever it might be. And you can run a scan on that. And then for our manual testing, like I said, this is where you can actually expand where it says view on the right-hand side. It'll expand it into a drop-down, and that's where we get the description of what was not passing or what you actually need to manually inspect for. When it says there's a focus order on something, it means when you're tabbing through something, the tab needs to be visually highlighted. So if you're on a button, like you press enter on the keyboard instead of clicking it, When you're submitting like your username or your password, for example, there should be a little box that kind of highlights that so that the screen reader can read it, the keyboard can read it, and usually often there's a visual ID as well, so that visually you know what you're actually going to click on, so you don't click on the wrong button. So that's just sort of the manual piece to all of this. And then lastly, we have accessibility sign-off. So what we do in the QA Hub is anyone can run these tests, but you have to assign someone sign off. So we have accessibility experts within Phenom who will review this if you want them to, or you can give it to a particular product person to just approve the accessibility testing so they can see what the results are as well. So that's just sort of our piece of this. And then lastly, we break down our results. So we actually break these down according to our WCAG standards. We can group different WCAG standards. They are written on what are called the POUR principles, P-O-U-R, perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. They're basically principles that, again, these standards are, they're trying to tell you that everyone needs to be able to perceive something on a website. So if you take away one sense like vision, if you're blind or low vision, you need to be able to perceive it in another way, such as auditory, right? So very often when you see buttons on a website, there should be usually 3 different ways of being able to identify it: a color, a word, and a screen reader, like an auditory, something like that. So there's at least 3 different elements. Very often there's an icon in there too, so somebody who can't read can at least identify through the icon what it might be. So no matter what, you will know what that button is, as an example. We have our results here. We can just break them down. It's just a reporting page, and this way all of our reporting is consistent across all of our products according to all of our standards. So it's just a lot easier for us to track. If we're looking at specific principles we want to make sure are incorporated into our products, or we want to check to see how we're doing in a specific area, we can do that in our reporting. And you can also break it down by page or by the individual scans as well. So that is it. I ran through a lot of information. So I'm more than happy to take questions if you have them. That is a great question. So the question was, he's newer to accessibility standards, and he wanted to know, oh, great, we have a mic. Yeah, certainly you can pass it around. He wanted to know if the accessibility checker will scan digital media like videos. Short answer is no. What we do is we do support any file type, so it is up to you to ensure that captions are there, as well as audio description. There are different file types. In order to support those, we will support any of those file types, but you do need to get those done, potentially by an outside vendor. Did you have a question?
So for the design studio that's coming out, are we able to run that accessibility checker on that before we push the page live, so then we're not having to go back and do changes?
Yes, you can do that today too. Before you publish something live, you'll be able to scan it, but the same will be in Design Studio as well. Yep.
Wonderful.
Is there functionality for generative AI to generate the alt text for all of the images that are going into the system? You can imagine that having to do this manually for each image is very time consuming. Is that being explored? Is it a future feature? Would love to hear that, because that would be an amazing, amazing example for my team and why we need this.
That is a great question.
I have a follow-up too, so I'm going to keep the mic. I hope that's okay.
It doesn't exist today, but it is something we're exploring. We are looking to enhance our accessibility checker. And as you know, I think Google, for example, has and Microsoft, they have generative AI that generates alternative texts that you can then review, so you don't have to think about it from the get-go. But yes, it is something that is on our roadmap for this year that we are exploring.
Love that. Great. Thank you. And last question. You showed some reporting around, the performance of the pages, what percentage they are accessible. Any reporting on whether visitors to the site are actually using the accessibility features and are actually responding to a responsive design that's accessible? I'm looking for a use case to show to leadership.
Sure.
We made our site from 2.0 to 2.1, and we saw more candidates interacting. We saw higher engagement rates. Is that something that is legally okay? Are you thinking that way? This is just a broad question related to
That's
such.
a great question. The short answer is no, we don't track that. There really is no way to do that unless you're specifically putting it in your cookies. And again, because it's legally protected information, we're not looking for it. We're not looking to see if you're running a screen reader or anything like that. So we don't really track that information in order to report out on it, no.
Thank you.
Hello. There was a lot of great demos today and a lot of scenarios that we walked through, and unfortunately accessibility and accommodations weren't mentioned once through all of those sessions. So I think that was a missed opportunity. I'm trying to think, where do we go next to talk about through all of the automation and the workflows, how do we ensure that candidates can request accommodations through all the steps and stages, and how can they, what is the built-in accessibility of like being able to schedule their own interviews and all of those things, the accessibility of those tools.
So is your question around specifically like the tools themselves, like which products are
Yeah,
accessible?
how can we learn about what is accessible currently, and how do we build accommodations and accessibility into those workflows as we continue to explore new products?
Are you talking about yourself as a client or what Phenom is doing, or both?
Both. How can my company learn about what you offer and how we can build
Yeah.
that in?
I will say we are most focused on accessibility in the career site, since that is end user facing. We know, for example, we have clients who are government contractors, so they legally are obligated to have an accessible website. So we are doing the same with our products, but they are in various stages of accessibility. And we are working on improving all of that to ensure all of them are 100% accessible. Yes.
Hi. So I have a question. So on the CMS checker in the CMS, is there a way to run that on every page at once so you can then see the results and go through and make all those updates versus having to run it every single time for each page?
Yeah. That's a great question. Again, the answer is no, but it is something that we are exploring. We are looking at ways that we can enhance our CMS checker overall to make it easier to use, to make it more robust, not to use a term from WCAG, but we really want to make sure that it's really checking for everything that you need. So if you do have specific things that you want to see from us, please let me know. I'd be more than happy for you to email me directly, or any of the AMs that you're working with, account managers that you're working with, and we will take that all into consideration. So we love that feedback.
Okay, and sorry, one more.
Yeah.
So I know we're really focused on the career site, which I love, but with all of the email campaigns that we do in the CRM, will there ever be functionality where we can add in that accessibility?
Yes, it is something I know the team is looking at. I don't know what stage they're in, but I can certainly ask them and explore that with them. But yes, that is important as well, since it is candidate facing. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate you being here and hanging with me to the very last word. I hope you had a great time and get home safely. Thank you.